For today's video, I'm comparing all my paints that contain the PR122 or Quinacridone Magenta. I know it can be confusing. On my previous video, I used a color called Permanent Magenta that look nothing like this pigment here. And then that is one of the challenges in watercolor, because the different company call their paint by different names, or sometimes it can be confusing. For example, what one company calls magenta, somebody else can call violet. But besides that, I have here 4 pigments, actually 5 if you include this Opera Pink by Daniel Smith. They all contain just the PR122, and they all have different name. Most of them call it Quin Magenta. I have the Windsor and Newton, Core, and Stephen Quiller, and Senelia calls his PR122 Helios Purple. Opera Pink by Daniel Smith has the PR122, but probably also some fluorescent. And then I have these 2 other colors that I included. One is the Opera Rose by Senelia. It's a PR81 column 1 and also fluorescent dye. I included it because in its hue it's very similar with PR122, and also I included this cobalt violet light hue from Senelia. It has PR122 listed as the second pigment in the mix. It's a PV16 and a PW6. I'm not sure if it wants to be a substitute for the cobalt violet, which we swatched in a previous video. We can look for a comparison if I can find it, but to me it's nowhere even close in hue or in vibrancy. It's definitely much pinker than this version I have of PV14. And the PV16, we also swatched that, and it's this manganese violet, and this one is much more on the pink side. I think the PR122, it's definitely more prominent. That's why I'm gonna include it in this swatch. And I created my squares. It's gonna be a long one, but I'm gonna speed it up. I'm gonna start with Windsor and Newton and work my way down, and we'll see how do they behave. And my swatches are all dry, ready to look at them and analyze and see which one is my favorite. No surprises here. I could guess from the little swatches that I put together how these paints react and how smooth they go, even on the cellulose paper. And some of the colors, I had them from some time ago, where I thought I would have just a few colors and I could use a nice arch watercolor paper. This is the cold press that I could swatch them. So I have this Opera Pink by Daniel Smith, very fluorescent, very nice, of course not lightfast. The Helios Purple by Senelia. Even on this paper, it has some interesting texture and almost like darker particles that sink into the texture of the paper. And for comparison purposes with the Cobalt Violet Light Hue from Senelia, I pulled out this Rose of Ultramarine from Daniel Smith, and you can see how nice and soft this color is. But we'll look at that in a little bit. For right now, looking at the part with the pigment, the PR 122. So this is just the paints I have with a pure pigment. The Queen Magenta from Winsor & Newton, I believe it went the smoothest. I like what it did here with mixing with water. Very nice gradient. Also very transparent, and most of these are transparent. The only one that has those interesting property is this Senelia. I don't know if you can see it on camera. Trying to see if the light can catch those particles, pink particles on top of that black line. The one here at the bottom is a Queen Magenta from Stephen Quiller. I got that paint a few years back when Theo here on YouTube was selling some paints, and he sent me that one with a few others. And it does also the similar things as the Senelia one, where it kind of separates. This one is more pronounced. It has very dark particles separating and layering. It has that shine that you can see sometimes with colors. Lifting wise, I'm surprised to see how this paint does. I would assume it's somewhat staining, and yeah, with a little bit of effort you can get a lighter shade, but not to the white of the paper. When it comes to moving in water on this first part, this first swatch, I put a lot of water down and then just drop a little bit of paint. Core one moved really nice, which that's probably the binder. This is also a little bit more staining than the Winsor & Newton. It for a very fast traveling paint, I like the exact edges I could get here with this gradient in water. Layering wise, a bit splotchy, but then of course I try to do a little too much too fast. When it comes to light fastness, Senelia calls there's probably moderate or not light fast at all. I have to place this in a window. I'm curious because Winsor & Newton, I think they give a good rating for theirs. Senelia does have almost a luminous property, but not by much between this, especially in this swatch with Winsor & Newton. Very similar. I would say medium to a high staining for this colors. And then, although not identical, and only this Cobalt Violet by Senelia has the PR 122, I swatched them to compare. We can see, although this by themselves look very nice and bright, when you compare with the opera colors, they kind of look duller. And also what I've noticed when I swatch them, they look much brighter going on the page than coming back out when they dry. So as I said, there was a little bit of a drying shift. The color goes nice and bright down, and when it's wet, and then as it dries, it loses a little bit of the brightness. But a trick when you paint with colors that you like them to look brighter, try and put a complementary color nearby, or play with your values, and then you can get that intensity and that brightness that you intend. So again, I compare these colors because in my swatch book I have them next to each other. I consider this almost like a specialty colors. I'm not going to use them in my everyday palette just because of the light fastness issues. I might just keep them for swatching for different work that I want to do in a sketchbook. The opera pink from Daniel Smith, it's very nice and neon. It's a PR 122 that probably has some fluorescent dye in it. Opera Rose from Sinelia, it's a totally different pigment, and I have the swatch here somewhere. It's a PR 81 column 1. I'm not very familiar with this. I have to go and research this pigment a little bit. It looks really nice, very soft, somewhat in between the brightness of Daniel Smith and the redness, the shade of the magenta. It has some texture, it doesn't layer the best, very transparent here. And then the cobalt violet, when it comes to the hue, I believe it's the closest for me, just to place it somewhere in my book. And I had the Rose of Ultramarine swatch, and they look somewhat similar. The cobalt violet hue from Sinelia, it's slightly pinker, but they have similar texture, some separation, not as dramatic as the Rose of Ultramarine, but that PV16 that's mixed in here does create some interesting separation. I really enjoy this color. On my swatch, I have mostly a very big part of matte stone where you can see the PV16 kind of sitting on top, and then the rest, the PR 122, that pinkish, and then some white there just to give it probably some creaminess. Opaque colors, definitely I can see the similar sediment on the black line staining. And I like the layer part, like I was so very impressed, maybe because it has white, you can see the values there really well. I haven't been inspired by this color to paint anything right now. I can see some beautiful roses or other florals that would look really great, especially with the nice range of values that this color can attain, from very soft pinks in all of this color to concentrated in the matte stone with a few issues here and there. But if I would have to pick just one, I'll probably go with the this Winsor & Newton. I think overall it does the best. I like the chord dispersion. I can see using it in more expressive watercolors where I don't care so much about edge control, although with some carefulness you can also get that even with fast moving colors. Yes, we're really good into the pinks. I have the PV19, which is a big one, the pinker version of the violet, the Queen Violet that we swatched in the previous video. Let's see what the colors are gonna tell us next.